The morning was deceptively calm. Dew clung to the grass of a small, seemingly ordinary valley somewhere on the Eastern Front in 1943. A few scattered trees lined the horizon, their branches trembling gently in a breeze that seemed too gentle for what was to come. But beneath the quiet, a storm was brewing. The ground itself seemed to hum as thousands of tons of steel waited, engines idling, crews tense. This was not just another clash, it was a duel that would decide the fate of a larger campaign, perhaps even the war itself. The stakes. Two armored forces faced each other across a narrow stretch of land, one side German, the other Soviet. Both had learned the lessons of countless battles, that a single misstep could mean death, and that courage alone was often not enough to survive. On the German side were the veterans, Tiger I heavy tanks with thick armor and powerful 88mm cannons, guided by experienced crews who had survived Stalingrad, Kharkov, and Kursk. On the Soviet side were T-34s, more agile, faster, and numerous, with crews hardened by years of retreat and desperate counterattacks. To the untrained eye, it was a simple encounter of tanks. But this battle, this 88-minute duel, would become a legend because of its intensity, strategy, and consequences. Commanders on edge. Inside the German command vehicle, Oberstlieutenant Kraus Richter studied a battlefield map under the faint light of a lantern. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. His men had trained for this, drilled until their actions were instinct, yet even the best crews could die in seconds on this ground. On the Soviet side, Captain Ivan Petrov walked among his T-34 crews, adjusting helmets, checking ammunition. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed urgency. Stay low, stay fast, every second counts. Both commanders understood the gravity. Victory would secure the flank of a larger offensive. Defeat could unravel weeks of preparation. Terrain, the silent player. The valley itself would play as much a role as the men or the tanks. Cratered roads from previous artillery bombardments would funnel tanks into predictable paths. A shallow rise in the center of the field gave visibility but exposed any vehicle on top. Hedgerows and clusters of trees offered cover for ambushes or for deadly traps. Every foot of terrain mattered. Every choice could decide life or death in the next hour and a half. The calm before impact.
As the sun rose, a layer of fog clung to the valley floor. Birds chirped nervously, then fell silent as the low rumble of engines grew louder. On both sides, the tanks idled, lights reflecting off steel hulls, the smell of oil and gunpowder in the air. Crews whispered prayers, checked instruments, tightened grips on controls. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, the duel began. First contact. Sparks fly. The lead German Tiger rolled forward, its 88mm cannon trained across the valley. A Soviet scout tank spotted the movement and fired, the first shot that would ignite 88 minutes of relentless combat. Shells screamed overhead, tearing up dirt and grass, smoke and fire rising from impact points. The valley, once calm, became a canvas of chaos, small craters, shattered trees, and burning vehicles. This was not just machinery. It was men fused with metal, courage tested to the absolute limit. Foreshadowing the duel. The first exchanges set the tone. German shells tore through Soviet armor, but Soviet speed and maneuverability allowed many T-34s to survive, regroup, and return fire. Both sides realized something crucial within the first 10 minutes. This would not be a conventional tank battle. This was a duel of skill, nerves, and decision-making. Each commander trying to anticipate the other. Each crew attempting to survive while taking out the enemy.
The next 78 minutes would be a relentless, almost cinematic sequence of armored warfare, a test of steel and human will unlike any other. The engines roared louder now, their vibrations rattling the very earth beneath the valley. Across the field, the two armored forces had drawn within sight of one another. Dust hung thick in the air, mingling with smoke from the first shells. The sun glinted off steel, bright flashes marking each near miss and each strike. Captain Ivan Petrov tightened his grip on the control lever. Stay low, stay fast, keep moving. He could see the Tiger tanks looming like monsters on the horizon. Their 88mm cannons gleamed, and he knew that a single hit could tear his T-34 apart. But he also knew his men were quick, nimble, and willing to risk everything to survive. The duel had begun in earnest. The first 10 minutes, a dance of death. The initial salvos set the rhythm. Shells screamed through the air, striking the ground, sending mud and debris flying into the faces of nearby crews. The German gunners were precise, firing calculated shots, aiming at weak points in Soviet armor. The Soviet tanks, faster and lighter, weaved between craters and destroyed vehicles, returning fire whenever a perfect opportunity appeared. The valley became a blur of motion. Smoke curled over the battlefield in thick plumes, obscuring vision. Shouts and commands were lost in the thunder of engines and the impact of rounds striking metal. This was no longer a battle of numbers. It was a battle of skill, nerve, and split-second decisions. Close quarters chaos. Within 20 minutes, some tanks were locked in terrifyingly close-range engagements. A T-34 barreled forward, side-scraping a Tiger's flank. Sparks flew as metal met metal. Crew members shouted over the roar, trying to reload and fire as the tank lurched violently across the uneven terrain. From another angle, a Tiger fired point-blank into a cluster of T-34s. Flames erupted, blinding and disorienting the survivors. Yet, from the smoke, another Soviet tank surged forward, ramming a Panther immobilized behind the wreckage. Steel bent, and both vehicles caught fire. The valley had become a furnace of fire, steel, and noise, a hellish spectacle of mechanized warfare. The human element. Inside the tanks, men were pushed to the limits of endurance. The gunner calculated angles, accounting for movement, slope, and recoil. The loader raced to feed shells into the cannon, hands blackened with grease. The driver swerved over craters, mud, and debris, trying to avoid direct fire. Every second mattered. One wrong move, one delayed shot, and it would mean death. Outside, commanders shouted, signaling movements to tanks barely visible through the smoke. Courage was not enough. Precision and timing were everything. Mid-duel, turning points. 30 minutes in, the first clear advantage emerged. The German Tigers, though heavily armored and terrifyingly powerful, were slower. Soviet crews used their mobility to flank and strike weak spots in their holes. Several Tigers went up in flames, their crews scrambling to escape before the interiors ignited. Yet the Germans struck back mercilessly. One T-34 hit was enough to tear through armor, overturning tanks and igniting fires. Survivors were thrown from the turrets, screaming over the roar of engines and the crash of exploding shells. Every tank destroyed was a reminder this was a duel where neither side would give ground easily, and every minute brought both terror and the possibility of glory. heroic acts emerge. By the 45th minute, individual heroism defined the battle. A Soviet crew under Lieutenant Alexei Morozov charged directly into the flanks of a Tiger, using speed and terrain to their advantage. They fired point blank, disabled the heavy tank's treads, and escaped under cover of smoke. On the German side, Oberstleutnant Richter's Tiger maneuvered to a ridge using high ground to fire devastating shots into the T-34 formations. Several Soviet tanks went up in flames, but the ridge made the German vehicle a target too. In these moments, strategy and courage intertwined, each decision a gamble, each shot a potential lifesaver or death sentence. The final 40 minutes, exhaustion and fury.
As the duel entered its final phase, both sides were exhausted. Engines overheated, tracks shredded, crews bleeding, hearts pounding. The valley had become a landscape of wreckage, burning hulls, shattered turrets, and craters filled with smoke. Yet the fight raged. The German Tigers relied on raw firepower and intimidation. The Soviet T-34s relied on numbers, mobility, and cunning. Shells struck close enough to shake tanks violently, sending instruments crashing and men flying. Minutes stretched like hours. Each hit, each maneuver was decisive. Every second brought chaos, terror, and the relentless roar of mechanized warfare. The conclusion of the duel. At the 88th minute, the duel finally slowed. The German Tigers had inflicted severe damage, but had lost mobility and some crews. The Soviet tanks, though battered, had survived and maintained control of the field. Both sides paused, not in surrender, but in exhaustion. The valley, which once vibrant and alive, was now a graveyard of metal and fire. The duel had ended, but the consequences reverberated far beyond this single engagement. Strategic and human impact. This 88-minute clash decided more than the outcome of a field. The Soviet forces secured their flank, enabling the continuation of their broader offensive. The Germans, though tactical victors in isolated moments, were forced to adjust strategy and retreat. Men who survived would remember every second. The fear, the exhilaration, the sound of metal tearing, and the flash of fire in their periphery. For those who fell, the valley became their final resting place, a silent monument to courage and sacrifice. The valley fell silent. Smoke curled into the sky, mixing with the morning mist, and the smell of burned metal and scorched earth lingered long after the guns had fallen quiet. The roar of engines, the screaming of shells, the cries of men, all had faded, leaving only a deafening stillness. 88 minutes of relentless fighting had ended. And yet, the duel's echoes would be felt for years, far beyond the field of battle. The battlefield. The landscape itself was transformed. Cratered earth, twisted metal, and the blackened hulks of tanks marked the space where human skill and courage had clashed. Soviet T-34s lay scattered, some burning, some abandoned. German Tigers, once symbols of invincibility, were toppled and broken, proof that even the mighty could fall. For the soldiers walking the field, it was a place of reflection and horror. Every step revealed a story. A turret shattered, a hatch pried open, a crew that had paid the ultimate price. It was both a monument to bravery and a reminder of war's terrible cost.
Strategic consequences. The duel was not just a tactical engagement. It was a turning point in a larger campaign. The Soviet forces had gained control of the valley, securing a critical flank and forcing the German units to retreat and reconsider their positions. What had begun as a simple confrontation between two armored forces had now influenced the broader war. Supplies, morale, and strategy were all affected. Commanders on both sides understood that the outcome of this single duel had repercussions far beyond its 88 minutes. For the Germans, it was a harsh lesson. Raw power play and legendary tanks could not guarantee victory without mobility, coordination, and intelligence. For the Soviets, it was a validation of speed, adaptability, and courage, and proof that even against the most feared machines, skill and strategy could prevail. Stories of heroism and survival. In the aftermath, stories of individual bravery surfaced. A T-34 crew had charged a Tiger despite overwhelming odds, disabling it and allowing their comrades to escape encirclement. Another German crew, despite being immobilized and under fire, held their position long enough to save a key supply point. These moments, small in isolation, became legendary. They illustrated a truth about war. Heroism is measured not only in victories, but in the choices made under the most extreme pressure. The human cost. Victory came at a terrible price. Crews on both sides were wounded or killed. Tanks destroyed, engines scorched, ammunition spent. Every man who survived carried memories etched deeply into his mind. The roar of guns, the flash of explosions, and the weight of fear pressing in with every heartbeat. The valley, once a place of life, had become a silent witness to both courage and tragedy. Some would return years later to place flowers at memorials, to honor the bravery of those lost, to remember that even in the smallest clash of steel, history could be changed. The duel in history. Historians would later study the duel, analyzing every movement, every shot, every command. It was remarkable not for the scale. This was not a battle of millions, but for the intensity, precision, and the immediate consequences. 88 minutes of combat had altered a campaign and, by extension, influenced the larger course of the war. Tanks that once inspired fear now stood as symbols of human ingenuity, of both destruction and survival. And the men who operated them became part of a story larger than themselves, a story of courage, skill, and determination. Legacy and reflection. The 88-minute duel became a legend, remembered not for the number of tanks lost or the miles of territory gained, but for the lesson it taught that in war, individual skill and determination could shape outcomes as much as strategy and numbers. Veterans would speak of the duel in hushed tones, describing the fire, the chaos, and the roar of engines. They spoke of fear, yes, but also of the intense focus and camaraderie that allowed them to survive. The duel became a metaphor for the war itself. Moments of unimaginable intensity where decisions were made in seconds and the fate of many rested on the courage of a few.